You're listening to Investigation Insiders by Integris Intelligence.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Investigation Insiders. This is Farhad. I hope you are all well and safe. Before we jump into the show, I wanted to share that we just got our year end recap from Spotify. One thing that we learned was that Investigation Insiders is in the top 25% of most followed podcasts. Truthfully, I'm not sure exactly what that means, but it sounds impressive. So I wanted to share it. And, I wanted to thank you all for your support. And this has just been an amazing journey. So thank you again. So today is actually going to be our last episode of 2022. And it's a really, really good one. Joining me today is my friend and retired CIA agent, John Franchi. How are you, John?
Hey, Farhad, great. No pressure, too. Thanks for that.
Yeah, I figured that I didn't tell you that in our pregame meeting that I would put that pressure on you, but I figured that wouldn't allow you sort of to think about it, right? And
Yeah,
you're used to doing that, I'm sure, in the line of work you were
exactly.
in.
Oh,
So, John and I met many years ago through some mutual friends, and we connected right away. Aside, I think, from our sports affiliations, we tend to think alike on most matters. So, John, perhaps you can start with a little bit about your background and tell our audience about sort of your career.
sure. Yeah, again, it's a pleasure to be here. I didn't, and congratulations on the success that you've had with the podcast. That's great. Um,
Thank
well, my background. So I originally come from Central Massachusetts. I'm from Worcester. Went to Holy Cross, studied history. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer like everybody else. And the agency came knocking on the door of the college, and I answered. And I really, at the beginning, wasn't really sure what I got myself into. My family, my dad's military. My grandfather was military, and he also worked for a local government. So I knew I wanted to do something government, but I wasn't sure what. And I kind of just followed the process along. And before I knew it, about by the time I graduated Holy Cross, I had an offer and wasn't really sure I wanted to take it. And my father gave me some good advice. He's like, "Why not?" He goes, "I'm not paying for your college, so you might as well do that." And I said, "That sounds like a good plan to me. At least we'll give it a try. You can always go back to law school, right?"
you.
And that's how I started.
So, talk about joining the CIA. Talk about what you can as far as sort of your progression, what you did, that kind of stuff early on.
Yeah, and sorry if I'm going to be a little obtuse, but I'll try to hit on the high points, and as we talk
Hmm.
more, we'll be able to go into it. So, you know,
Sure.
I again, I knew I wanted to serve, and it just seemed like, and I was involved when I was young in Model United Nations and a lot of foreign policy things, and so that it really got my interest to kind of jump in there. Once I joined, you go through the normal training process, and then I was slotted to go as a case officer or as a field officer to go out working at embassies around the world. And I started in the Middle East. So I worked through the Gulf. I was 22 years old, so I really hadn't had any experience doing anything. I did spend a couple years in the Gulf, and then I went off and studied Arabic for a couple years. From there, I was in North Africa working, and then from there back to the Gulf. So I tried to stay out as much as I can. And there's a theme in my career where I just tried to avoid Washington. I was fortunate after 3 tours to be allowed to go to graduate school, and I studied Islamic philosophy at Harvard. I got a master's there, and the timing of that was great because that was in 9/11, and actually I'd been in school for 2 3 weeks when 9/11 happened, and I thought I was going to get pulled out, as an Arabic speaker and whatnot, but they had plans for me to go and serve in Israel after that. So I was focused on Palestinian issues, and then thrown into like the war on terrorism. After I left there, I came back to the States for a while, focused on supporting CT work as well as domestic engagement. So working with companies, working with outreach for the agency. And I think a lot of people on this who are listening to this have probably, if I've met you or not, or you've met people like me, there is a lot of that goes on in the organization because it's amazing how patriotic Americans are and how much they love their country and how much they're willing to do for it. I left there. I hadn't had time to go. I went to war zones after that, and I was in Benghazi. I was in Libya, and spent. That was probably a total of 3 years bouncing around those two places. And then I came back to the States. I tried to avoid it, but I got sucked into the building down in Langley, and was working on counterterrorism issues, focused mostly on Syria and Iraq. And that was at the time when that was ISIS was just starting up, and we were looking at Baghdadi and whatnot. So did that, helped set up those programs, and then worked with the military for some time, about a year and a half, and with their programs overseas as on the same issues. And then at the end, I was trying to get back to my kids. They're up in Worcester, and so I went back up. I came back and was able to get something up north, and got close to them up in New York, which was great. Although a Bostonian up in New York, it's a little bit rough. Like, although it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Although my wife, so Murray, became a Yankees fan somehow, and now that's a problem that we have to deal with on a regular basis. But it's all good. It's I spent a couple of years there, and I was and I retired. I retired in 18.
Yeah.
29 years in, and then went to work in the private sector. So.
No, that's I mean it's an amazing career, and thank you for your service. So just sort of a side note, right? Being away and in all these different places, as a young man, I'm assuming you didn't do that type of traveling before then and spend extended periods of time away from your family. What was that like? I mean, I think everyone sort of wonders that a little bit about, like obviously, there's a whole aura around CIA agents and what they do and how they do it and all that sort of stuff. But can you talk a little bit about that early on experience of what that was like being away?
Yeah, it's intimidating, honestly. The only travel I had done internationally was on spring break, and coming from a good Jesuit school, I was drunk half the time, so I don't even remember the trips. But so I mean, the Bahamas and Cancun, I don't think really count. And then after that, all of a sudden you're thrown in, and sent off to the Gulf, and like, where the hell is that? I wasn't even sure where I was going in the beginning. I was 22. I was recently married. My wife was 21. And again, she had never really lived away from home either. And, the Gulf's a pretty easy place to live. You got people from all over the world, but still, it's a really hard thing. And then add on top of that is this, the intensity of the job.
Yeah.
And it's intimidating. I mean, even being in the place, you sometimes wonder, am I supposed to be here? Am I good enough to be here? What is this? It sounds cool, to be part of the agency, and you're in Langley, and wow, isn't this really neat? And then all of a sudden you're thrown on the streets and you're doing the job.
Yeah.
And it took me a little bit of time to really get adjusted and acclimated to it. I know some folks can jump right into things. For me, I just, it takes me a little bit of time to feel comfortable. And I started to see that it really was like perfect for my personality. I really loved it. And what I loved about it was the creativity, the ability to have impact, and to be able to do, to do just just a lot of things that I didn't think were possible, especially given how old I was. I was the youngest person for the first three assignments I served in. And I don't know, for anybody who's worked overseas at embassies, usually the Marines are the youngest, and that's the big joke of how young they are. I was younger than most of the Marines, which was kind of weird. But I think what after about the first three months or so, really just clicked,
Yeah.
and found the groove.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Was there any moments? Maybe there were a lot, but anything that sticks out to you where you were like, there was something that happened, or something where you said, wow, I mean, this is for real, and I have to just get it going, or was it just the slow transition into just kind of clicking?
Well, I think every day was like that because every day was different. And
Okay.
so the challenges that you face every day and the folks that you're going up against are players, right? I mean, so when you're facing off against Russians or Chinese or even some of the Arab folks and whatnot, and you're dealing with them every single day, it's you're on, right? It's the Academy Awards, so to speak,
Yep.
and you have to be able to perform. What was really profound, I found, is the impact of what you were doing, and the discussions you were having, the trust that it imbued, but also when you're writing and you're sending things back to Washington,
Yep.
it can really make that change. And I tell young people now, if you want to have impact, think of the agency, because very early in your career, you're going to be writing, you're going to be doing things that are going to go to the president, that are going to go to the National Security Agency or National Security Council and affect policy. And there's no place else like that that I've experienced. So
That's really interesting. So was there a like favorite location? Was there any place that you really said, this is my place. I love my time there. I love the work I did there.
I sometimes struggle with that because every place was a lot of fun.
Hmm.
Some places were better than others. The two best or most, and I be honest here. So there are two places: Jerusalem and Yemen, Sana'a. Sana'a was great because the work was amazing, but also I met my wife not in Yemen, but like from in Dubai when I was serving there. And if I hadn't served in Yemen, I wouldn't have met her. So I was really blessed to have that assignment. And what's really great about a place like Yemen is there's very few places in the world anymore that are kind of pure, where you can get away from McDonald's and Walmart and just you go
Yep.
into Europe now and okay, you can go to the Tower of London, but everything's the same. Like it's like very similar to what it's like in New York. You go to Yemen and you're literally you feel like you're going back in time 200 years. It's crazy, and the people are great, and it's you can just taste the history and the culture that's going on there. Jerusalem's the same way. I mean,
Yep.
Jerusalem is really modernized, but when you start to scrape away the surface and you start checking behind doors and going through the old city. I was in the old city about a month ago. Went back again. It's crazy. Again, it's like stepping back in time, and the work in those places is truly impactful. I mean, Yemen is a hub for Al Qaeda, so the work that you're able to do in a place like that really has an impact on the homeland. Jerusalem is the center of it all, and so anything you can do to try to help, make broaden understanding, help policymakers understand what's going on better, be able to move the needle even just a little bit, so that trust can be built between the two sides there. It really is. It's great, and you feel like you're actually you're earning your money and you're doing some good in the world. And then what I used to joke about in Jerusalem is like you got to have a hobby. Like my hobby was breaking into every church I could find, and we were always trying to get into ones. The Holy Sepulchre became like my son and I. Jake at the time was 3 or 4. We used
Yep.
to like try to get into all the little cubby holes there, and we got to know all the priests. And the relationships were. I mean, to this day, they're still friends. I got my son Matthew, who's now 17. Well, he was baptized at the church, and that was probably the most covert operation I've ever run. It was so those would be probably the two best places I've been.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds crazy. So what about any places that you did not particularly enjoy?
Yeah, Washington. um,
Figured you were
it's
going to say that. Yep.
Yeah, of course, right? Look, any place overseas. When I got on the job, I had a chief who became a mentor. Now he's a really good friend, and he used to joke. He's like, any place out of here is fantastic. He's like, don't argue. Like everybody argues, they want to go to Paris or Rome or whatever. No, no, any place out of here is great. And it's just Washington's Washington, right? And you get sucked into the machine, and it's a lot of process and it's a lot of artificial pressure. Don't kill the messenger. Well, a lot of messengers getting killed every day there, right?
Yep.
And so it became important to be able to support the field and be there for them, and to be able to make sure people on the hill understood what was going on and make sure the money flows and make sure you get the support you need. But No, I mean it was one of those places you do your time, and then you just go and you're praying for probation, right? So you can get the hell out and go back
Yeah,
and do what you were paid to do or trained to do or born to do. So
that makes sense. That makes sense. So what do you like in terms of what did you like the most about being part of the agency, and what didn't you like so much?
the best part of it, and I think once you have trust built up, and this is probably like any company or any place, but
Mhm.
once your management, once your leadership, once your colleagues trust you, the place is a blank slate, and there's really nothing you can't do. And you start to build that confidence to be able to do things. So you can get really creative in how you have to action targets, so to speak. And I'm not talking about like, going after bad guys necessarily, but how do you get it at people that matter? And how do you find people that have the information that the US government needs? And
Right.
to be creative in doing that is, that's the fun of it. You never know, right? And we used to do, I joined at one point like an astronomy club, because it was affiliated with a group that I was particularly interested in, and you meet all kinds of interesting people in a much more casual setting, and you become friends.
Yeah.
We would do a lot in Egypt when I was there, archaeology, and so, not only would you meet interesting people and have incredible life changing experiences, but like you'd be there like we were there for when a tomb opened up, and my foot is in Life magazine because a Life magazine photographer, took a picture of this sarcophagus when it was just opened. So I don't know if I've got some bad juju flying around or something because of it, but you get put in these positions where you're like, how the hell did this happen? How am I here? And
Yeah.
those things, and I found that really that helped in the job because it would provide you with relationships and experiences with people, and that trust you have, that's the core of the job. If the people that you're working with who are willing to cooperate with you don't trust you, then why are they with you? And so, facilitating those kinds of experiences, I think were great. I mean, on the negative side, again, I think it's a government agency, right? And so government agencies have process. Government agencies have, their bottom 20% whose job is to make your life hell. And so, and that's, trying to learn how to deal with that and um, cope with it, and also move beyond it, is challenging. It's not impossible, but I think overall the negatives were far far less than the positives. I was thinking about that, when you and I spoke previously.
Yeah.
And I mean, I loved everything about the job. We had bad days like anything, but it was just truly an incredible experience. I got really lucky to have. So.
Yeah, like some of the stuff that you're talking, and you mentioned it. I mean, this is true, like of anywhere you are. You just happen to be in the CIA and all these, crazy places. But it's true. You make a really good point. I mean, relationships and trust and credibility and all those kind of things become a necessity in everything that you're doing. So that's really a helpful connection. So, our show is called Investigation Insiders, and our listeners love hearing war stories. Do you have a memorable, I mean, something that you can discuss, obviously? Do you have something that, a story or an anecdote that you'd be willing to tell us and just sort of get behind the scenes a little bit?
Um, yeah, so I love to tell the story about one of the first things I ever did. I was and just how things go wrong. I mean, what do they call it? Murphy, right? You just
Yeah.
have to assume whatever's going to happen is going to go happen wrong.
Yeah.
And I was out there. I was supposed to meet a guy one night. I was really nervous because I really wasn't experienced doing this thing. And and you've got this, he's supposed to be at a certain place at a certain time, in a certain car because he was going to pick me up. And I didn't know what he looked like either, so he's supposed to, tell me a certain thing, and I'm supposed to say, that way I know it's him. And I get to the place at the specific time, and no guy. And I'm like, okay, so, And I'm a young guy. I'm like, you can't mess this up, right? Like, I'm like, my bosses are watching, right? Because I'm that young, I'm brand new. So I'm like, all right, well, I gotta, be patient, right? Be patient, John. So like, I wait a while, still nothing, I wait. And I'm getting to the point where I'm like, this is probably not going to happen. And a car pulls up, pulls down the street, and it was a
Hmm.
very quiet area. And it was supposed to be like a Mercedes or something. And there's a minivan. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not it. So I'm kind of trying, like, I'm like trying to pretend like I'm not supposed to be there. I'm supposed to be there, or whatever. And
Yeah.
I kind of turn away, and it pulls up next to me, and the window rolls down, and the guy looks at me and he says, "Hey, I forgot what I was supposed to say. Get in." Right? And I was like, okay, right? Dumbass from Worcester, Mass, right? I'm like, okay. I jump in the car, and get in there, and I'm just thinking in my head, oh my God, like I'm like in trouble. I'm caught. I'm in trouble, and of course I wasn't, And the guy that he's talking, and I don't know what he's saying, right? I'm just hearing the voices in my head, and then all of a sudden he says, "Get out." I'm like, "Okay." I got out, right, and went back to the embassy the next day. And the boss was like, "How'd it go?" I'm like, "Went great." Right, and he's like, "What'd he say?" I'm like, "He told me this," and he's like, "Great," and then there you go, and off to the races, right? And it was one of those things where, if not by the grace of God, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I learned the important, like, a lot. I mean, every experience taught me that was something early on where I'd be like, oh, I would never, do that again. And like, again, I was very fortunate. Like, in the war zones, things like that happen, and bad things happen. But the importance of being prepared, being the importance of, not, unknowing what's going to come. Like, that's, a lot of people ask me, did you ever feel threatened? Did you ever feel like your life was in danger? And I don't say this to be cocky. I didn't, and it wasn't because I wasn't in, you know, experiences. I wasn't on the, I wasn't in on teams that kicked in doors, but I was involved in things where it could have gone really wrong really fast. But you prepare for it, and where the problems happen is when you're not prepared for it. And that was something I always strove to make sure I never got myself in that situation, nor people that I worked with or people that worked for me. I just always wanted to make sure that there were no surprises, because nothing good ever comes from surprises. So
Sure. So how long did it take you to realize that you wouldn't do that again? Was it immediately after, or did it take a
7 seconds. Okay.
few
Well, it was, again, I think everybody has those experiences in their lives where they're like, "Oh, like, thank God, it went the way it did."
Yep.
And you need, I think with any job, when you're young and you're learning, you make mistakes, and you have to make sure you have good. And I had wonderful mentors and colleagues that helped me. Um, and you could talk through things, and that's where that trust comes in, because they also need you. And so to be there and not to judge. And nowadays we throw everybody under a bus,
Yep.
for the littlest thing. But if you don't have that, how else are you going to learn? And I was able to, take those experiences, really learn from them, and then understand what people who worked for me were going to go through, and to help them become better at what they're doing, because it's an art, not a science. So
Yeah. Yeah. So, John, you despite the fact that you've gotten out of the government and doing what you did for many years, you're still very much into sort of mining intelligence and from around the globe. And fortunately for myself and many others, you share that information, which is sort of the inspiration for these for this particular episode. Um, so I wanted to talk to you. So this is the what the episode is going to be about. Talk to you about events from this past year and what to kind of look forward to in the future. So perhaps you can talk a little bit about the metamorphosis of these weekly updates that you sent, and
yeah, it's, well, COVID. I'm not gonna say inspired me, but it basically, my wife got really tired of me wandering around the house bugging her. So, and she's just like, what did, like, old spies do? Right? And I'm like, go do something, go, like, do. And I was like, okay, fine. And fortunately, I have a lot of friends, in New York and the East Coast and whatnot. And we talk about, like we're talking now about what's going on in the world. And a couple of folks asked me, hey, look, could you just pull together some thoughts for me on like the big themes or what's happening? Because we know you're still in touch with people, and it's like, you have friends. It's nothing classified, but like you have friends, and you kind of understand how they ebb and flow, how issues move, and I've been really fortunate to have a lot of good friends overseas and whatnot. So I started doing these, the kind of every 2 week update kind of thing where it was what's coming over the horizon. I mean, anybody can read the news, and anybody and a lot of these companies and agencies put out these really long reports which don't really say much. And I'm not saying that mine are the greatest thing in the world, but what I would try to do is say, look, this is what it means, this is what's coming, so you can be ready for it. Because you can't prepare for what's already happening, but you can prepare for what might be coming around the horizon. And it started, I was working on, it was Afghanistan, George Floyd, COVID, I think was in the beginning, what I was focusing on, and then some of the politics, inside baseball with when Trump was in office. And then from there, it just evolved into, China, now Ukraine, and where that's going, Russia, cyber, what's going on in the Middle East, just because, as you can imagine, I could reach there, Africa, and some stuff in Asia. So, and, I try to think of it in a way where, like, if I'm briefing the ambassador, if I'm briefing the president of a country, or if I'm briefing some senior in Washington, like, what are they going to care about, and why, and what does it matter, and why do I care? Like, and so when I write it, I try to address that, and I try to make sure it's based, it's non, like, I'm not political. I joke that, like, the last time I had a political thought was when I worked on the Dole campaign in 1988. I mean, I don't really care. I just care about the country and the United States. And so what I try to do is keep it apolitical, try to, and be very frank, and just very direct and very tight, because nobody has time. Like, and so, I appreciate all the time people taking and listen to this, but it's, I think, no more than a few pages and short articles. Yeah. So that was the inspiration. And and then it just kind of took off. I mean, people were really interested in it, and it's mostly to friends. I don't give it to a lot of people. But it's something that I'm happy to share with people that find it useful.
Yeah.
And if they're willing to share it with people that they find useful, okay, great. That's the whole point. That's why I joined the agency to start with. So
Yep. Yep. No, it really is fantastic. I mean, just again, to talk about getting straight to the point, I think that's really what I enjoy the most. And it sort of, if you want to dive into things further, you can, but at least you're aware of sort of the high level points. So, I mean, so there were obviously a lot of events and issues in 22, from the continuation of the pandemic to the Ukraine to inflation and a lot of sort of activity around the midterm elections. I know that's a lot to unpack, but what sticks out to you?
yeah, it just doesn't stop, right? I mean, it's in places that you wouldn't really expect it to be. I think when I look at the last year or even 2 years, and I try to figure out, okay, where are we going, and where were we? What I really worry about, and I try to take a step away from it. I try to look at it a little bit more strategically. I feel like we've almost reached the tipping point, and a lot of what's happening in the world right now is because the U.S. has been unwilling to be a leader. It's not that we're not the most powerful country in the world. It's not that we don't, have the most money, and that our voice is not the loudest. But we've been consistently not a great partner, and it kills me to say that, but I think we've almost reached the tipping point. And Afghanistan was probably that. I used to point out to people, look, people aren't coming after us after Afghanistan because of Afghanistan. Like, before Afghanistan, there was Syria. Before there was Syria, there was Iraq. Before there was Iraq, there was Palestine. Before that, or at the same time, there was Libya. We consistently drew lines in the sand, and then we weren't there to hold them up. And people remember, countries remember, leaders remember. We seem to forget, and we get distracted. And that was when Ukraine started. I was very concerned, because I said, look, if we don't, get Russia out of there really quick, something's going to happen, and we're going to get distracted, and then it's not going to be on the front pages, and no one's going to care, or they're going to try to, and it's slowly going to go away. And that's kind of what happened. I mean, if you remember, I mean, we was all hot and bothered about what was going on there, and it's a significant issue we need to be still aware of and still focused on. But then Johnny Depp and Amber Heard had a problem. So there we go, right? So now let's focus on that, and that becomes a big deal, right? And then the Queen died. I mean, God bless, right? I mean, she's a great lady, but like, so then we focus on that, and then the elections and the midterms, and then now, I mean, you really have to search to find out what's going on in Ukraine,
Yeah.
and the World
That's,
Cup's going on, right? And we,
yep.
we're playing around. So to me, I was reaching that tipping point more than just Ukraine, inflation, midterm elections, COVID. I think a lot of that is a culmination of that, um, of us kind of not stepping up to where we need to be and not being consistent leaders. And I think that's going to be moving forward, what's going to be driving a lot of the challenges that we're going to be facing over the next, say, 2 to 3, 4 years, until we get new leadership, possibly or possibly not, and maybe there's some changes in place. So,
Sure. So I mean, what should we be concerned about in 23?
yeah, 23. I worry on a couple of levels. One is I worry as an American, like I worry about things like fentanyl. I
Yep.
worry about the mass shootings that are going on. I think there's a lot of attention paid to it, but again, it gets drowned out.
Yep.
We start talking about, well, this is the most mass shootings we've ever had, and then there's another one and another one and another one, there's no easy solution for these things, but it kills me because it's us and we're doing it to ourselves, and we need to be able to be better at that. But I think when you start to step away and you start looking internationally, again, China and Russia are going to continue to be challenges to us, I think, for the foreseeable, and in different ways. I mean, for Russia right now, Ukraine is a big challenge. I think it's something we need to focus on. But it was interesting. I had some conversations. I was in Eastern Europe not long ago, and I was talking to them about. I said, well, what about energy? Like I said, are you guys worried you're not going to have enough energy this year with gas and all this? I know that was a big challenge, and the answer was I wasn't expecting it. They said, no, we're fine this year. I'm like, oh, you are? He said, yeah, no, we're fine. The prices are going up. He said, what we're worried about is next year. He said, we were able to have at least enough stores, and the warehouses are full, and it'll get us through this year. But next year, if the Russians keep things shut down, despite all the things we're doing, we're still going to have, that's going to be where the challenge comes in.
Mm.
And I think I don't think many people are focused on that from that perspective. And then, what's happening, where is this going to go? Like, that's always the answer. When's this going to end? And are we going to have a nuclear war? And what I love about the Russians, I mean, they are so good at misinformation and just playing us. There's
Right.
a wonderful book out there called The Quiet Americans, a guy Scott Anderson wrote. And I don't read spy books much. This book follows five former senior CIA and OSS officers through their careers, and really unique people. One guy he eventually worked up and ran Barnum and Bailey Circus. Frank Wisner, who is the former DDO head of operations, and just kind of how they went through, how they grew up and how the organization grew up. And what the theme through all this is, competing with Russia. And the Russians just owned us throughout World War II, post World War II. And it was all this disinformation. We thought we were doing great, and they were just eating us alive. And I think that hasn't changed. They are really, really good at these things. If you remember in the beginning, oh my God, Putin's going to die, right? He's got cancer. His leg is shaking. He's got a swollen head, all these things, right? And it's all BS, right? It's why would you show me a video of his leg twitching if he really had that problem, right? And of course, then that went away. And then all of a sudden, we're going to have a nuclear holocaust. They're going to use nuclear weapons. And that got everybody energized and focused and concerned and scrambling. Now that's gone away. Now he's sick again. So I think for Russia, they are what people sometimes forget is they have the economy the size of the state of Florida. They got nuclear weapons, and they punch way above their weight.
Right.
That their goal is to become that, they want a seat at the table with Xi and Biden. But there are concerns. They are doing things asymmetrically, like so. We never expected them to be relying on Iran, North Korea for weapons, and they are. The relationships that they're using, right, that they've had all along, they're using them in unique ways. I mean, the drones that they're getting from the Iranians, for example. So, and that's got the Europeans really scared, right? And plus the Europeans made, they have strange bedfellows. Like the Germans, God bless them, right? They all had, ties to the Russians, and now it's come and due. And so how that moves forward, the strains that's causing on the Europeans, and the ability of the Russians to have influence. Because to me, this war in Ukraine is not about just taking over Ukraine. It's about instilling fear throughout
Right.
that entire part of the world, because then people start jumping in bed with the Russians. And we've seen that because the U.S. hasn't stood up. The U.S. made it very clear at the beginning, we're not going to fight. We're not going to send troops. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. These are all the things we're not going to do. Well, I mean, thanks for showing me all your cards at the table in Vegas, right? I mean, now
Right.
I know how to bet. And that's how the Russians and actually the world's been playing it, because they realize, okay, well, if the U.S. isn't all in, why should we be all in? And
Sure.
that was the fear I heard from Eastern Europe. So that's one. China, I mean, the Chinese similarly, I think it's their time now. They've been sitting and sitting back for the longest time, and they've been building and they've been, establishing themselves and being very quiet about what they've been doing. I mean, they've taken over all the, the mineral rights in Africa. I mean, these are no surprises to people. They've been funding all these ports, the Belt and Road efforts and whatnot. But now, after this 20th Party Congress, what I'm hearing, what we're seeing is that Xi's going to really step out. He's like, okay, it's time for China to be on par with the United States, and they're going to be, and they're going to, materialize that. It's really going to start playing out much more, I think. So the strains, their ability to flex on the supply chain and have influence on us, I think, is something realistic. Their ability to project power in the Pacific, which they view as their area, is going to become much more real to us. And it's going to put us in a corner where we have to decide, what are we going to do? I don't think Taiwan's on the table for the coming year, maybe two, but still, I mean, what are you going to do? How are you going to answer these things? And I think that's been an issue all along. One of the things as an agency officer that really frustrates me is you see this thing with the Cuba syndrome, right, where the officers were getting injured from these sonic or whatever it was. I know they're still trying to figure it out. But the question becomes, you know, okay, like let's say you have intelligence that says that the Russians were actually doing this. You have to do something about it. And I think there's a reluctance I'm seeing out of the administration, and not just the Biden administration, but it's the generally out of, like, it goes back to the Trump administration of, are we willing to take action to support ourselves in these regards? And I think that's again where we're going to continue to have these challenges by places like Iran and North Korea, and then countries who are our allies, like for instance the Saudis, the Emiratis in the Middle East, other parts of the world, hedging their bets, saying, well, look, okay, we love America, we've got a lot of vested interest with the United States, but now now we're going to have to get close to China. And I think we're going to see over the next week or two that the Chinese are going to go visit Saudi Arabia. They've got some really big agreements they're going to sign, and that's been 5 years in the making, because the Saudis are like, can we trust you? Are you going to be there for us when we need you, America? So I think those are some of the challenges that we're going to be looking at. The things that haven't happened recently, and what I'm really worried about on more of a tactical level, are cyber attacks and then terrorism. We've taken our eyes off the ball, honestly, after we left Afghanistan on CT. I mean, I know the agency, and there's agencies that are working it, but overall, as I think from a national standpoint, we've been more focused domestically. We've been more focused on, the local groups, and then the politics around the elections, right? Whether you like him or not, Trump is really becomes a central focal point for a lot of these things, and it takes all the air out of the room, and it takes all the attention away from other issues, and your inability to be able to deal with it. So I'm concerned that we could see, a significant terrorist act this year. I don't know if it'd be in the United States. I mean, I know that groups have been able to exploit the open borders down south. The what Another thing people aren't really watching is the activity of the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians down in Latin America and South America, and putting people in places. Are they planning anything? I mean, you don't put people in a place if you're not planning something or potentially planning something. So, I mean, but what might that be? And we know that a lot of nation states will support whether it's criminal groups or terrorist groups to kind of give them plausible deniability to be able to support whatever their agenda is, and that's something we have to keep our eyes on. The other issue, cyber attacks. I think we're still seeing like cyber attacks are still the biggest threat to the United States. They're still ongoing. We haven't seen anything significant. I don't think we'll see anything that takes down the entire grid on the East Coast, because then we have to do something. But I think we're going to see some really specific targeting of infrastructure here in the United States. That because they've been out there. We know the Russians and Chinese have been probing the systems. They've been remapping. They've been looking. Now we've been putting up our own defenses, which have been great, and I think those have repelled a lot of things. But that's a tool that they have, and they've shown a willingness to go after infrastructure. The Russians, with blowing up the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, that was under the ocean there. I mean, there's tons of those the fiber connects and with cables that are going and that the world's economy runs over. I think those are things that are actively being threatened and need to be followed. I mean, there's a litany of things. So I apologize if I'm kind of all over the
No.
place a little bit, but there's a lot we need to focus on, and a lot of it's because they can because they feel like there's not going to be any repercussions.
Yeah, again, I think it sort of highlights the issue that again, we have to pay attention to these things, and we have to address it sort of one by one, and none of it is negotiable, because it's historically people haven't paid attention to things until something has happened, and then almost have an overreaction, right? So one of the things, John, and I don't mean to sort of embarrass you by bringing this up, but obviously, I'm a big fan of yours, and sort of the information that you put out there. One of the things I'm hoping for is to inspire John to maybe put out information more publicly or via a podcast in the future. So we're hoping that this episode really inspires John to do that. So there's a lot to unpack in everything that you just said. I guess to sort of close out point, I want to just discuss with you. A lot of our audience are companies with global interests, right? Security threats. What should they be? You've gotten into it, but is there anything that sticks out in your mind? Obviously, you already mentioned cyber, right? But beyond cyber, what other things should they be concerned about related to their global interests, travelers, etc.?
I mean, one of the things I've seen, and I've worked with a bunch of companies up here in Boston, and a lot of friends up here have been asking for my help with the Ukraine, is a lack of preparedness. It seems like there's a shift. When I first got into the private sector, I was amazed where people would only react if something bad would happen. And look, the government does the same thing as well, but
Yeah.
but at least it has some plans in place for that. And I found that the contingency planning, the crisis management, things in place were all kind of cookie cutter, and they when crap would happen, it's just like right, and then people would freak out, like, what do I do? And I think, well, don't you have a plan? Well, it's on the shelf there. It's like
Yep.
we're not really sure what we aren't sure what to do. What so I'd be working with companies and folks and trying to help them plan for these kinds of eventualities or these kinds of realities. So, it was when Ukraine first started. I talked to a couple friends who have firms in Ukraine, helped them get through the initial portion, and then if you remember, Putin left.
Hmm.
Or he kind of he went back east, right? And everyone was like, okay, yay, we're back. And like, let's go back to Kyiv. And it's, of course, life's not back to where it used to be, but people were like, okay, we'll be okay now. And we don't need this anymore. And I
Right.
was like, no, it's going to come back. Just be ready. And so I would say to people who are looking at the global situation right now, who have presences internationally, is just make sure you're prepared really. Like, make sure you have real plans in place. Make sure you take advantage. Like, if you're in a Ukraine, if you're in places that are that tense, make sure you take advantage of these times to make sure you have good systems. You have the ability to reach out to people. You have the ability to move people, and that you have everything you're going to need in hand. I know sometimes, especially the economy's tight, business isn't as good as it should be. We don't have the money to spend, but there's ways to mitigate some of those concerns. And I'd emphasize that. I think over the next year, maybe two, we're going to have real energy problems in Europe. And so making sure that people have, this, at least the critical infrastructure of your company has backups and has that resilience that can survive it, is going to be really, really important. I think cyber attacks again, Russia, like in talking to people about Russia, right now we know Russia's networks are really weak. They've got lots of holes in them, and for some reason, the Ukrainians haven't really gone after those things, or and crippling Russia, because there's a concern of what is that going to lead to. And I think we could see that happening if the Russians continue to do what they're doing, which I think they will throughout this winter, where their goal is to devastate Ukraine's infrastructure and basically cripple the country, starve it, make people freeze, regardless of what happens to their forces on the ground, regardless of Ukraine pushing them back. Then you could start seeing these kind of severe reactions on the part of people, either pro-Ukrainian or Ukrainian, to go after Russian infrastructure. And then we may end up having, remember the old game, movie War Games, right? It's sort of like, okay, now, misunderstandings, and where's that going to take us? And so just being prepared in that regard, and having those plans in place. The other thing people are not really, I don't think, looking at that much is down south, in Latin America, South America. And I mean, we look at it from the standpoint of the southern border and immigration and how many people are streaming across the borders, and it becomes a political issue and whatnot. Take a step, for me, it's like take a step back. The Russians, Chinese, the Iranians are actively working down there. The governments out down there, the ones that have been pro-US, are aging. The people that are coming in to replace them are looking to make their bones. They're making alliances with the Russians and with the Chinese because they want to. They don't want to do it how their fathers did it, and they don't see an alternative with the United States. So being prepared for that, the status quo is going to change, and hopefully we're going to step it up, but we may not. And I think you have to be prepared for that eventuality, or at least aware of what's coming, so you're not surprised by it.
Sure. I want to piggyback on the preparedness comments. We've talked about that with a lot of people on different episodes here, and I'll tell you, I agree with you in terms of, we work with clients as well, and there's two components to the preparedness, right? There's the CYA legal insurance component, right, where you have to check a box and say I have a document, right? And then there's the true, what you're talking about is a document that's dynamic, that's living, that's breathing, that works, right? That people are looking at, assessing, reassessing, and adjusting, right? So I find that there's a real disconnect between the two. I think a lot of companies have plans, right? But what those plans, in the practical use of those plans, I think is very, very limited. So just a couple of things, and we're going to get into takeaways for the show, but this would be my takeaways from kind of what you said. Cover the basics. I mean, every you have to assess what your risks are. You have to cover the basics, what's most likely to happen, and make sure you have plans for that, right? You have to make it usable and understandable, right? It can't be in this complex language that no one can understand. It's got to be in such simple language that almost anybody could understand, right?
Hmm.
There has to be training around that so that people that you're doing two things. One, you're getting people prepared, and two, you're sending a message that you care about that, right? So that's so important. And then just to touch on the costs, right? I worked, as you know, for Guardsmark for the first part of my career, and the founder and CEO Ira Lippman
Hmm.
always used to talk about not the cost of doing something, but consider the cost of not doing it, right?
Right.
And
Yep.
such a simple concept that just always resonated with me
Right.
about, just not, and sometimes it's not even money, it's time that you have to put into it, right? So
Right.
just, I wanted to piggyback on that, and that would be my sort of, aside from, I think everyone should listen to this entire episode, and there different things are going to resonate with different people, but just that preparedness piece is so critical. So I throw it back to you. If you were going to have people sort of take away one or two or three things from kind of the things that you discussed today, what would be most important that people walk away with from you?
I agree with you 1,000%. I think your comments brought me back to when I was overseas in the war zones, and everyone I think thinks, oh, CIA people super trained, they know exactly what to do. No, no, like a lot don't, and that need for communication, that need for training, that need to make sure that the first time you talk about the need for an evacuation or whatever, or an active shooter, isn't when it happens,
Right.
because you want to make sure people are aware of what they need to do, and it's a real dialogue. And I think that's something we're not really good at, I think, in general, and it's something we need to be good at, because I saw it happen in Ukraine, but look, things happen here again. These shootings are happening all over the United States,
Hmm.
and they're happening at synagogues, and they're happening at, I mean, I know we're talking about a lot of anti-Semitism now, but they're happening at schools, they're happening at supermarkets up in
Hmm.
Buffalo.
Hmm.
There's no safe place. So
Yep.
having this ability and this realization that what's happening in the bigger world can affect us here in the United States, being aware of it, not being scared of it, and being willing to talk about it, and giving people real options, especially in a market, a labor market where companies are struggling to keep the people they have.
Yep.
So if you want to keep the people you have, empower them in that way. I mean, I'm not saying your entire world should be around dealing with an active shooter or dealing with terrorism or
Yep.
whatever, but that can be part of the discussion. And then it also makes them safer at home.
Yep.
Teaching people skills in cyber, and how to have good hygiene, and what they need to do with their computers at work, helps them have better stuff at home. We've seen the Russians already probing personal IP addresses, not of famous people, but of normal people.
Hmm.
So, we've got to be aware of those kinds of things.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you, John, I really enjoyed our discussion, and I really thank you for, again, you lived up to it, and this is a great end of year episode, and I think it gives people a lot to think about. So we're going to, put John's contact information, so that you can reach out to him directly. Feel free to reach out to us if you'd like to, and we can get you connected. But you know, people like you, John, have impacted the world up to this point, and I believe can continue to have a great impact by sharing information that, again, you can't necessarily just go online and Google and find. And I hope our listeners and others take advantage of that. So thank you so much for joining me today, and have a great holiday season and new year.
Thanks, Farhad. I really appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, I value our friendship greatly. It's always a lot of fun. You've cost me a lot of money because I've had to buy watches to try to keep up with you. So thank you for that.
A whole
And
other
yes,
episode, man.
it's another episode.
Yeah.
But no, I really appreciate this. And anything I can do to be helpful to anybody listening, please don't hesitate. So
Thanks so much, John, and thank you all for tuning in and following in the comments and everything like that. We can't express how greatly we appreciate it. Have a great holiday season and happy new year till next year.
Don't forget to follow us. We are on LinkedIn and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube.